deconstructionist responses to racism. You know, I'm rather thankful for having had the privilege, well, I shouldn't say privilege because that's a bit of a sketchy term, having had the luxury of having once seen a gentleman perform a stand-up routine in which I think he was trying to be as racist as possible. Now, obviously, he did not succeed, because it's one of those abstract limits that the curve never approaches, to use a geometric analogy. But what he was saying was something about affirmative action and how it's obviously discriminatory. And then he followed it up in the format of a joke by saying, yes, white people have a lot to worry about, such as their inheritance and so on and so forth. I don't remember the exact reference. And I thought, yeah, you know, this guy is doing well as a comic, because he manages to just kind of lure you in, bait you, so to speak. You think for one moment he's going to say something reasonable, and then he says something totally ridiculous. But I think that he fails to actually tell a racist joke, because as we all know, a racist joke is like the sun. We can all see it, but not one of us can actually touch it. In other words, it's a limit that's never approached because there is no such thing as racism. It is as much a mimetic disease as anything else. Now, one counter-argument to this is that there was a poll done. Oh, how lovely, a poll. Of that supposedly stated, and this would make absolutely anyone, I think, with one's wits about oneself, indignant, just because the sheer stupidity of it, as tends to be the case with most statistics from what I've experienced. But I think it can make one doubly indignant because like many intellectual diseases, it kind of spreads its tentacles out at you and sometimes strangles you, and sometimes makes it impossible to argue against it because of its sheer stupidity, and because of not only its ability to infect you, the would-be critic, but its audience. The statistic was, or the poll, the conclusion of the poll, the generalization, the very concise generalization, I should say, to warn you in case you thought this was going to be of any actual validity, was that white people, this is direct wording as I understand it, are less likely to believe in the existence of racism and racial discrimination than non-white people. End of quote. Now, yes, it's not as bad as a quote by C.S. Lewis, but it's still obviously a bit sketchy. Like, what the fuck does that mean, right? Well, let's get down to the root of it. It's basically saying that non-white people, again, I'm just quoting the words directly, we'll make sense of them later, we'll break them down, are more prejudiced than white people. Right? I mean, that's the conclusion I drew. That's the conclusion you drew, right? No? Well, let me explain how I came to this conclusion. Obviously, what they're saying is that white people are less likely to believe in race than non-white people. In race as a factor, as something that influences our lives. Now, some people might make the argument, no, they're not less likely to believe in race, they're less likely to believe in racism. What's the fucking difference? There's no fucking difference at all. Like, what is racism? Well, it's discrimination based on race. Well, there you go. They're less likely to discriminate based on race. They're less likely to believe in the system of thought, which isn't really a system, it's just a neurosis called racism. It's like you're less likely to believe in Marxism, or less likely to believe in Nazism. Not the belief in whether or not it exists, but the belief in whether or not it is justified. A difference between ethic and fact, and yet not really a difference. I mean, you might say, well, hold on now. There's a difference between believing in racism and actually being racist. No, there isn't. How the hell do you know that someone else is being racist? Besides, what you defined as racist is discriminating based upon ostensibly racial categories, such as white. So isn't the author of the statistic oneself actually a part of the problem? And if that person's a part of the problem, that person has a worse ethos, why would you listen to it? Furthermore, why would you listen to a statistic that definitionally restricts the voice, that supposedly applies to everyone, and is of a universal problem, but restricts the voice of a group of these people to speak out against it, or to speak their minds about it? I mean, you'd find that absolutely ridiculous, right? That's a very bad game to play. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, I suppose it's a sort of game, but it's one that people are kind of roped into playing involuntarily. So, what you mean to say, as the proponent of the statistic, is that you believe this symbol white or non-white to have some significance, and you project that on the world around you, so you categorize people according to an arbitrary system based on things that you've read, peculiar to you, because no two of us have read exactly the same books, and no two of us have had the exact experiences, and no two of us make the same sense of it anyway with what freedom's given to us arbitrarily. So you arbitrarily assign these categories to people, and you assign people to these categories, but you presume that someone else that you've never met is actually somehow relating with these categories that you've assigned. Is that true? Okay, now hold on. You mean to tell me there's a difference between what you're doing by doing that and discrimination based on race? Isn't that just another name for it? I mean, I feel insulted now because I need to figure out what you mean by discrimination based on race, and I thought that you and I were in agreement about it. I guess things aren't so clear after all, are they? Well, then you might easily say, discrimination based on race is when you treat someone a certain way because of that person's race, when you mistreat that person. Well, hold on, aren't you mistreating me just by assigning a label to me? Especially if that label, by its definition, restricts my ability to talk about what you're doing at this moment, to speak out against you. Isn't that the definition of force? An act that I cannot resist. Isn't that, by definition, actually itself a problem? The very nature of how you constructed this. Oh, no. This isn't nearly as bad as, like, lynching people. Oh, isn't it? I see, the thing about lynching people is that usually this doesn't happen on college campuses. We usually try at least to make them as safe as possible. I think that this is a bit of a problem, maybe worse of a problem, because it's not happening out in the open. You're not being overtly violent, you're being subtly violent, and as we all know, that's much worse. I mean, I think that's pretty ubiquitous, right? And let me get this straight. You've discriminated against people according to a set of categories which you've pretty much dreamt up in your head based on how you've interpreted literature or history or what you've been told or what you've heard or what you've listened to on the news or what you imagine in your head. Based on the sum of all those things, and you mean to say that some other people that you've never met, ostensibly, that you've never met, majority of the people you haven't, in this country you haven't met, are actually discriminating based on your same categories, exactly the same, and are treating people poorly. But you've never witnessed it. You've seen people being treated poorly, but you presume this person to have the same set of prejudices as you do. How? Why? Why do you want solidarity with people who are bigoted? Because that seems to be what you're going for through citing that statistic. Also, you seem to be somewhat hostile towards a group of people who are actually immune to it. In their world, racism doesn't exist. Well, wouldn't you try to emulate those people and strive for their ideal rather than deriding them? I mean, clearly, they're not responsible for this problem, and they're not going to stoop to the level of making sense of their struggles and their experiences by appeal to this meme. I mean, there's so many other ways of explaining violence, such as ignorance, bad faith, logocentrism. Pick your favorite. Why would you presume upon something that cannot possibly exist? Because in order for it to exist, first of all, it has to be a physical object, and since it's not a physical object, that's a reification. And in order for it to even to exist, mimetically speaking, as a general thing, you have to presume that other people think exactly like you do. That's absurd. And I think that in our country, where being intellectual isn't necessarily attractive, people like to pretend to be stupid, and that's why this statistic circulates. Because I very much doubt that you honestly believe it. I think you're just pretending, because this is just a joke. Statistics themselves are a big joke, but principally, they're supposed to, I guess they're kind of like Zen koans. They kind of make you think. They kind of put your mind in a weird place, just through the specific artistic manipulation of these symbols. And sometimes they can be very abusive. Just like sometimes words can be very hurtful. Because it's like someone threw you, said catch, and you didn't see what the person was throwing you, and the person threw you attack. And it's like, ouch, that really hurts. Except in this case, it hurts your mind. It hurts your brain. It hurts, well, whatever it is that perceives things. Because it literally has no meaning to it, aside from what the person throwing it has ascribed. And it makes you suspicious. Well, where do I fit into this? Never thought of it before. How does this person classify me? Why do I have to be set apart from people? Either either by pedestalization or by denunciation. I don't know which is worse. In this situation, would I rather be white or non-white? I thought I was non-white to begin with. What if I'm actually white? I mean, maybe I am white. Maybe I'm special because I'm white. Maybe I should go around and tell people I'm special, that I have the answer because I'm white, and I'm immune to this problem that other people seem to suffer from. You see, the thing is, the statistic actually seems to be an argument for white supremacy. Well, I know that that's very politically correct. I mean, it's the logical conclusion of political correctness, right? I mean, you just follow out all of math. But I just struggle with it because I think, no, surely this person isn't advocating for Nazism. So what's this person advocating for? And then the person cites more statistics. And it's just Jesus. I just deconstructed this one. Now I have to deconstruct all of those? I've already spent 13 minutes and 30 seconds deconstructing this. We don't have time for this. We have actual issues to deal with, not projections of the individual imagination. Not things that you just throw out there because people will step on them like tacks. And they'll start bleeding. And that'll spread disease. I think that my opponents are spreading a mimetic disease. And I think that anyone could fucking do that. In fact, if people were stupid enough to believe this, and I know they're not, because most people are intelligent. I was brought up to believe that most people are equal, and that equality should be valued. I know that most people are intelligent. So I know that most people, when they encounter stuff like this in their textbooks, year upon year, hearing about the Civil War or the Holocaust or whatever, they think, that must have been fictional because there's no way that people could be that stupid. And I guess the jury's out on whether or not it was fictional. But surely we've come a long way since then. And surely the people who think that this is intrinsic to human nature, that history is totally objective, would of course be angry at me for denying it because it's intrinsic to their human nature. But no. Surely even if there's enough people like that out there to actually become organized and to create an atrocity such as the kind I've read about in a textbook, which of course I've never had any immediate experience with. Well, surely, despite that, there's still no evidence that anyone believes in this statistic. I mean, if people believed in this statistic, it would become true, right? I mean, it's a basic metaphysical reversal. I mean, people usually think that something's true and it's represented by a statistic, but we all know that's wrong. I mean, come on, this is the 21st century. No one thinks that way anymore. We know the statistic is just an idea. It's just a construct of symbols. We don't know what it refers to, but we can always infer, as with any work of art, what it means and relate it to our experience. But supposing that this statistic people took seriously, well then, what you'd have is a large mass of people, some of whom are identified as white, whatever that means, and they know themselves to not be as racist as everyone else, and they feel awkward about it. Either they feel obligated to use their special privilege, being the way that they are, apparently, according to the statistic, to inform people who aren't this way of what it is, or they lord their knowledge over these other people, these uninitiated, these primitive people, or they become really hostile. Now, that's surely not the kind of society that we live in, because I know that human beings are more or less rational creatures. We're the rational animal. We know better than that. But there would be other problems, because supposing that the people who were not white found out about this too. Well, you know what Nietzsche says about ressentiment, the weak always envy the strong, so they'd say, no, you know what? Those people out there, they don't know what it's like to suffer like we do, but we know. And you know who's responsible? They are, because they're the strong. That would create a lot of problems, right? Because the moment that anyone, and it can literally be anyone, attacks you, you might arbitrarily say, hey, that person's white, and if you haven't yourself self-identified as white, and then you use the statistic to justify violence not just to that person, but anyone you associate with that person, which is kind of crazy. Well, we don't have that, do we? I mean, then there'd be riots in the streets over the slightest incident and mass violence. But again, human beings are the rational animal, and most people are intelligent. I mean, surely Nietzsche was wrong when he said that it's only a minority of people who are intelligent. No, surely most people would not believe something like this, because that would mean that it would be enough for just one media outlet to publish a statistic like this, and it would immediately gain truth. It wouldn't be true beforehand, but it would become true because of how people react to it. And of course, because everyone has a different interpretation of it, it would be a conflicted reaction, and maybe even a very violent one. Well, surely, that's just not the case, right? I mean, because anyone would see through it. I mean, for instance, if I can literally label anyone white, if I myself am not white, then I could also label people who from another perspective look just like me. Like, let's suppose that from your perspective I'm black and he's black, but I think he's white, so he steals from me, so I kill someone else who I think is white as well. But you see, that other person from your perspective is also black. Well, you see, that's an interesting situation, because actually, my friend Tyrone, who lived in Compton, California for a while, said that among the most prejudiced people that he knew were black people. Well, of course, this isn't an objective quality, but that would certainly, like, if from his perspective all three of us were black, that would actually make sense. Right? But surely we don't see any of that going on. So what seems to be the problem? The problem seems to be really simple. The way you resolve this one mimetic disease is through a kind of a mimetic vaccination, if you will. And that is deconstruction. You realize this is the result of people projecting their own prejudices in a logocentric fashion. But the moment you actually begin to think about it, it actually ceases to exist. And I guess that makes us all white or something. Or maybe that just makes it all right. Or something.